We'll stay in Liberia, where Joseph Boakai will now become Liberia's new leader after his rival and sitting president George Weah conceded defeat after a tight presidential election. President George Weah's phone call signals a peaceful transfer of power in a region that has recently seen several military coups. The country's elections commission said on Friday that the 78-year-old Boakai, a former vice president, has managed to secure a narrow victory with 50.9% of the vote to Weah's 49.1%, with almost all of the votes counted. Now, the results mark a considerable shift compared with 2017, when the former international football star Weah had succeeded in defeating Boakai comfortably by garnering 62% of the vote. He rode a wave of public hope to the presidency, promising to combat poverty, develop the country's ailing infrastructure, and crack down on injustice and corruption. Well, Ambassador Joe Keshi, a former Nigerian diplomat, joins me now to speak on the build-up to the election and the aftermath of it, as well as what the victory of Boakai means for Liberia in the long run. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Newsday, Ambassador.
Good afternoon, Cynthia, and how are you?
All right, you're speaking to Mumbai, but nevertheless, it's great to have you. I'm going to get straight into it. Now, this is...
Sorry.
No worries at all. Now, this is the second peaceful, democratic transfer of power in almost 80 years for Liberia. Now, what are the components that you feel are at play that are aiding such a smooth transfer of power with such a troubled history as a backdrop of the nation?
Well, in this case, I think it has more to do with the person and the character of the leadership. If the character was a political rascal who is crazy for power and wants to remain in office, rather than being a good sportsman that he has always been, a great footballer, by the way, I think that we would have seen a different situation, so we should congratulate him for being a good sportsman. And Liberia, you see, because if he has signaled that he was going to fight rough in order to retain, in order to be able to gain a second term, there are enough of political rascals all over the place that would definitely like to work with him to ensure that the process, is not as peaceful as we have said. So at the end of the day, it depends on the person, the character, the worldview and the determination of the leader itself to ensure that there is peace, harmony, and that election does not result in war and killing. And in the case of Liberia, they've gone through terrible times. And so for any leader to concede and decide that, look, I'm not going to fight, I'm not going to engineer people to fight, just because of election, we must give them, a big kudos for this. And for me, my reaction was that anytime, we've been talking about that democracy is receding in this part of the world, in the continent. But when you see things like this, once in a while, it gives you a ray of hope that, if we can have more and more of such, great leaders, conceding defeats and not, killing, ensuring that people are destroyed or killed and the electoral process doesn't go well, I think it gives us some hope that, democracy we might think it's receding, but there's certainly reasons to be hopeful.
Absolutely. Now, what a lot of people feel made his concession so magnanimous was the fact that the margins were so close. It was a very tight race. Now, in his concession speech, he made reference to the fact that, and I quote, "We must be vigilant of the dangers of division." Realistically speaking, with such close margins, I mean, we're talking under 30,000 votes difference here. How realistic is it for the new government, Joseph Boakai's government, to be able to lead a relatively unified nation?
Well, this is where, unfortunately, I have not seen the speech of the president-elect. But you can actually begin to judge what the president-elect will be like and how he will act in office, based on his first reaction, to the concession speech and what he himself says to the nation. Because if someone concedes to you, your first responsibility is to make a great speech, rally around the people, trying to bring the people, together, promising them, as, look, it's become the cliche, you may not have voted for me, but I'll be your president. And so when Liberians hear this, or when people hear this, it kind of, diffuses the tension. You give a promise that you are going to be a president for all. So at the end of the day, it depends on how the president-elect now takes over power, what he does, and how he reacts to, being a president for all. If he wants to become a parochial and think that he's going to act only for its constituency, of course he's going to run into serious problems, as we've seen in other, places.
Right. Now, one thing that's unexpected to many is the fact that there's a huge rally for young leadership all across Africa. Yet, and especially you look at Liberia, 60% of the population is under the age of 25. Yet you see a 78-year-old Joseph Boakai defeating a 57-year-old George Weah. What are the dynamics you feel are at play here? Is Africa ready for young leadership?
Well, look, anywhere in the world, people are ready for young leadership, but you won't go into all homes or nooks and crannies to begin to ask young people to get involved in politics. Number one, they have to get involved. If they don't get involved, who is going to elect them? And by the way, the United States is also having the same problem today. You have 81 or 80 years old president, seeking for re-election. The likely opponent is going to be 70-something, almost 80 himself. By the time he takes over office, he will be in the late 70s. So the question, therefore, is, yes, the young people clamor for leadership, but where are they? Where are they? That's a simple question. They have to get involved, particularly at an early age. Look at all those who are in a position of leadership today. They started at very early part of their lives. And so it's not enough to, like we've done in this country, to say, I think we have a bill that has been passed, not too young to run and things like that. So where are the young people? Until they begin to organize, until they begin to run, they won't be in a position of leadership. But instead, particularly in this country, what you hear the young people say, but more especially women, is that they should be carried along. They should be given an opportunity. When it comes to power, nobody carries you along and nobody gives you the opportunity. You either fight, you either get involved and fight for it, or you just get, the crumbs from the table, which is also why women are not making great progress. Because very few, obviously for some reasons, very few are prepared to get involved and fight and challenge the men in this race. So it's not a question of, there are not too many dynamics about this. First thing is that they must get involved. Women too must get involved. And then they can take it from there.
Right. Now, some people would argue that young leaders like George Weah ruin it for others. For example, George Weah came into office with a promise. One of his biggest promises was the ability to deliver an economic and war crimes court. Of course, reparations is a huge part of the sentiment in Liberia currently. He was unable to deliver that, and of course, several allegations of corruption and economic mismanagement. What happens in this case where you do have those young people who are throwing their hats into the ring and they seem to disappoint their people when given the opportunity?
No, I do not think that George Weah disappointed because of his age. I think there are so many circumstances, Yes, he disappointed people. And by the way, all leaders, most leaders who are not properly prepared for office do disappoint their people. Okay, but there were a few good things that he did that we need to recognize. I mean, the whole process that took him out of office now, somehow along the line he initiated it and things like that. Circumstances and availability of resources and the Liberian situation could have also posed some challenges for his leadership. So it now depends. We need to wait and see exactly what the new leadership will do. And here's the problem, you know, because when politicians in this part of the world, especially here in Nigeria, they're going for election, they make too many promises. They don't even prepare. They just come out and make all sorts of promises. You know, look, so many years ago, I think it was a Punch, there was a Punch cartoon that said something like, now the election is over, you can change your promises. Because when you make too many promises, given the circumstances like what we find ourselves in this country, the state of the economy, the high cost of living, this was not what was promised. What was promised was completely different from what the people are getting today. So it has nothing to do whether he failed because he was young. No, there must have been other circumstances, the economy, the resources available for him to do a couple of things. But that of, you know, dealing with the issue of justice, particularly those who lost their loved ones during the war years, was one thing I thought he could have dealt with. But God knows why he didn't do it. And I don't have information about the challenges he faced. Instituting, for example, an inquiry, you know, like they did in South Africa a few years ago, to find out exactly what happened and those who be prosecuted. And I sincerely hope that the new president will be able to do the same.
All right, spoken like a true ambassador. Let's look at issues of political hegemony. And, you know, some are saying Liberia is building a culture that will ensure that the country will not see one-party dominance for long stretches of time. We're seeing the revolving door of power at play in Liberia. However, it's not reflective on the economy. What we're all clamoring for on the African continent are vibrant democracies where we don't see countries leaning towards becoming one-party states. But if you look at this case study, it doesn't seem to translate to the economy, the welfare of the people. So is this really what African countries need? Do we really need this consistent change of parties in power, or should we just allow parties to an opportunity to roll out their policies and their manifestos over a long period of time? Won't that be more beneficial for developing economies?
You know, my first reaction to the Nigerian Constitution, for example, when it was enacted, was the first-year tenure for the president, you know, obviously because we virtually borrowed almost everything in our Constitution from the United States. And it did not occur to the framers of the Constitution that 4 years might be okay for a developed nation like the United States, but certainly not okay for a developing nation like Nigeria. And if you see what has happened since 1999, you know, whether at the federal level in this country, for example, or at the state level, you know, you use the first 2 years to settle down, and then almost immediately you begin the campaign for the re-election. And this is the bulk of the problem, and I think this is what you are referring to, you know, with respect to Liberia. But having said that, here is my take also on the shortness of tenure, you know, in this part of the world. I think the more we have a revolving door constantly, all the time, would be a signal to politicians to change their ways, to change their language, to change their behavior. Because if they know that, look, what has happened in Liberia today, it's an example. I mean, it's a challenge to the incoming president. He should be aware that the people of Liberia would also vote him out in the next 4 years if he fails to deliver, at least significantly on his promise. The Ghanaians have been going through this, you know, changing governments here and there every 4 years. I think they've done it a couple of times. And my take is that the more we do this revolving door thing after every 4 years, politicians might begin to sit up. They might begin to change their behavior. They might begin to focus on doing certain good things for the people. As it is now, they are not doing much of that, particularly in our own country. So if you have leaders change every 4 years and new ones come in and they don't last, and then others are coming in, and if they seriously want to do 2 terms, I think from day one, they have to make up their mind that, look, they're going to start from day one to do a lot of things to please the people, to do a lot of things to relieve the people from their challenges and their sufferings. Because look, whether in Nigeria or in Ghana or Liberia, Sierra Leone, or anywhere on the West Coast, or indeed anywhere in Africa, people are going through terrible times. And it is beholding on the leaders to consider, to do a number of things that can relieve the pains and the agony that citizens are going through. But yes, let's continue. We have no choice. The Constitution already says 4 years. So if we begin to change leaders every 4 years, it sends a signal, and a very strong signal to upcoming leaders, that if they are serious about doing 4 years, they have better settle down from day one. Bring in competent hands that will help them run the administration. And by the way, to be candid, if you cannot do anything good in the first 4 years, there's no guarantee that you do better in 8 years. So let's continue with what we have now. Hopefully it will pay out, pay everybody well at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Of course, we all continue to celebrate the shining example of democracy that we've seen from Liberia. Ambassador Joe Keshi, a former Nigerian diplomat, thank you so much for your time today.